All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Now, if you're usually here with us, you know our world. It's typically measured in ArcSIF preprints, loss functions, tracking the latest in AI.
Yeah, we're usually neck deep in those technical papers.
Exactly. But today, we're doing something, well, a little different. Still really crucial, though, for understanding the currents shaping the world we all work in.
That's right. We're stepping away from the purely technical for a moment to look at a really significant piece of legislation that recently passed through Congress.
A massive bill, based on the sources you shared. They give us a roadmap, thankfully.
They do, and it's needed.
And let's be honest, reading legislative text, it can feel like, I don't know, navigating a super opaque code base with zero documentation.
Huh, that's a good analogy.
Yeah. So our mission today, using only the sources you've provided us, is to really extract the critical information from this bill because, the articles make it clear this isn't some minor policy tweak.
Not at all. It's drawn significant attention, notably facing public opposition from some very high-profile figures.
Right. The sources explicitly mention criticism from people like Elon Musk.
They do. And they even give a little background on maybe why that tension exists. They touch on the relationship between Musk and former President Trump.
Ah, okay. What do they say?
Well, one article recounts Musk's perspective. He apparently saw his informal advisory role, which he called heading a Department of Government Efficiency, simply reaching its natural end.
Okay, so from his side, the role just kind of finished its course.
That's his take, according to the source. But importantly, the same source includes a contrasting account from Trump saying that he actually asked Musk to leave that advisory position.
Ah, okay. So different stories there about how that relationship ended. That's interesting context.
It is. And understanding what's actually in this bill helps provide clarity, maybe, on why someone like Musk might oppose it so strongly.
And more broadly, it gives us, insight into the strategic direction the U.S. is setting. Even if your day job is purely focused on the tech side, this legislative landscape, it really forms the foundation for everything else.
Absolutely. You can't ignore the ground rules. So let's unpack this thing.
Yeah.
The first thing that just jumps out from the sources is the sheer scale.
Yeah.
This isn't a niche bill. It's not focused on one single issue. It's incredibly broad. It reaches into so many diverse areas of U.S. policy all at once.
So less like a laser beam, more like a floodlight.
Exactly. The sources show it covers everything from healthcare, social safety nets, taxes, energy, defense, education.
Wow. Okay. It's like a comprehensive remodel of several floors of the policy building, all happening simultaneously.
That's a good way to put it. And to make sense of that breadth, we really need to look at the specific policy changes detailed in your sources.
Right. Focusing on what those changes are and their potential impact, maybe especially how they might resonate, even indirectly, with our technical audience.
Agreed. Let's start with healthcare and social safety nets. The sources outline some pretty significant proposed changes here.
Okay. What stands out?
Well, there are substantial shifts noted for programs like Medicaid and CHIP. That's the Children's Health Insurance Program.
Major programs.
Huge. And one very specific provision prohibits using federal funds for what the bill calls specified gender transition procedures.
Okay. What does that include, according to the source?
The source lists examples like certain surgeries, implants for feminine breasts or gluteal fat implants, and administering medications like puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones.
Got it.
It also notes that states choosing to expand Medicaid under new rules. They aren't required to get that increased federal share, the FMAP, for these specific procedures in those expansion groups.
Okay, so a targeted restriction on how federal dollars can be used there. What about changes to how the programs themselves are run? Administration?
There are definitely some. The bill includes measures designed to prevent people being enrolled in Medicaid or CHIP in multiple states at the same time.
Ah, okay. How?
It requires a new system to be established to facilitate this. There's a specific date mentioned, October 1st, 2029.
So a few years out.
Yes. And additionally, starting January 1st, 2027, those managed care entities, the private insurers, often managing Medicaid, CHA care, they'll have to send address information they get to the state.
Presumably to help spot those potential duplicate enrollments across states.
That seems to be the goal, yeah. Efforts to improve data sharing and prevent potential fraud or errors.
Makes sense. What about eligibility rules more generally? Any shifts there?
The sources note some changes. Updates to how asset limitations apply to homes on agricultural land, for instance.
Okay.
And also changes to requirements for documenting citizenship, or nationality for eligibility. This includes removing the state requirement to provide medical assistance during that sort of reasonable opportunity period someone usually gets to provide their documents.
Okay. Tightening that window. And I thought I saw something about new community engagement requirements.
You did. Yes, the bill introduces new requirements for community engagement activities for certain beneficiaries.
And what happens if someone doesn't comply?
Well, if they're found non-compliant, they'll get a notice and have a 30-day period to either demonstrate compliance or show why the requirement doesn't apply to them.
Okay. Sounds like it adds administrative steps for both the state and the individual, potentially.
It likely does. And there's another really notable change regarding cost sharing.
Okay. What's this?
This is a key one. Starting October 1st, 2028, the bill mandates that state Medicaid plans must impose deductions, cost sharing, or similar charges. Basically, amounts greater than zero for medical assistance given to certain specified individuals.
Okay, must impose costs. Are there limits?
There are. The bill limits which services this applies to. And, importantly, states cannot deny services if someone can't pay.
That's crucial.
But, and this is also crucial, the source points out that providers are explicitly not required to waive these fees.
Wow. Okay, that's a critical distinction. So the state can't turn you away at the door for not paying the fee, but the clinic or hospital isn't obligated to just write off that charge.
Exactly. It could potentially shift costs or create, new financial pressure points for beneficiaries. A very complex, layered change.
Definitely sounds like it. What about other safety nets mentioned?
Moving briefly, the sources mentioned changes to SNFP, that's the Food Assistance Program, changes related to alien status eligibility, restrictions on what expenses, like internet costs, can count towards certain allowances.
Yeah.
And the bill also includes a repeal of a specific National Education and Obesity Prevention Grant Program.
Got it. Tightening some rules in SNAP, cutting a specific grant program, and the Affordable Care Act, the ACA Exchanges. Anything there?
For plans starting January 1st, 2026 or later, the bill limits special enrollment periods based on income changes. It seems to focus them more narrowly on, life events or other specific circumstances.
Less flexibility based just on income fluctuation.
Seems so. It also requires reconciliation of premium tax credits. Those are the subsidies helping lower premiums, and eliminate certain thresholds for the percentage of income you have to pay towards premiums before credits kick in. Also effective January 1st, 2026.
Okay. So big picture on healthcare and safety nets. Sounds like tighter admin controls, some specific funding prohibitions, new cost-sharing mandates, tweaked eligibility, a complex set of adjustments.
Right. Representing a particular approach, it seems, to managing these large systems. Now, should we shift gears to education and workforce? That's highly relevant to the talent pipeline for the tech industry.
Absolutely. Critical area. What does this bill do there?
Well, a major change involves student loans. Federal direct unsubsidized Stafford Loans specifically.
Okay.
The bill establishes new aggregate limits on how much someone can borrow over their entire education.
Lifetime limits.
Essentially. For undergraduate programs, there's a cap of $50,000. And for graduate or professional programs, the limit is $100,000.
Wow. And when does that kick in?
These caps are set to take effect July 1st, 2026.
Okay. Hard limits on total federal borrowing. That's a significant shift. What about how loans are repaid? Any changes there?
Big changes here. The bill significantly constrains the Secretary of Education's authority regarding income-based repayment plans.
How so?
It explicitly states the Secretary generally cannot create, issue, or modify regulations or guidance on existing plans.
Cannot. That's strong language.
Very strong. There's a narrow exception allowing for maybe one interim rule within 270 days of enactment. But beyond that, administrative flexibility seems really sharply curtailed. The sources also mentioned the Repayment Assistance Plan and confirmed forgiveness is available after 360 qualifying monthly payments under that specific plan.
But tying the Secretary's hands on administrative changes to how millions repay loans, that feels like a major policy lever being pulled back.
It certainly limits executive branch flexibility in that area.
Yeah.
Now, what about Pell Grants? Those are crucial for lower income students.
Very much so.
Pell Grant eligibility is also adjusted. Students won't be eligible if their student aid index, that number determining financial need, is too high. Specifically, if it equals or exceeds twice the maximum Pell Grant for that year.
Okay. An upper limit based on need calculation.
Right. Also, students enrolled less than half-time are excluded. And importantly, the bill introduces this concept called workforce Pell Grants.
Workforce Pell Grants.
Yes, specifically for eligible workforce programs. But the bill explicitly states students pursuing or who already hold a graduate degree are not eligible for these specific workforce grants.
Ah, okay. So directing some Pell support specifically towards non-degree workforce training, perhaps shifting emphasis away from traditional higher ed, especially grad studies.
That could be an interpretation, yes. It could influence educational pathways.
Interesting. Anything else on education?
The bill updates the process for penalizing institutions based on their student loan default rates. It provides some relief for institutions that voluntarily stop participating in federal direct loans for a specific program. And details are given for calculating promise grants, which support specific student populations.
And you mentioned a broader limitation on the Secretary of Education's power earlier, beyond just loans.
Yes, this is quite sweeping. The bill includes a provision stating the Secretary of Education cannot propose or issue any regulations or executive actions related to the Higher Education Act of 1965 unless Congress has explicitly authorized it through a specific separate act.
Wow. So not just loan repayment plans, but basically any regulatory action under the main higher ed law needs prior congressional approval.
That appears to be the mandate, yes. A significant constraint on executive branch action in higher education policy generally.
So summing up education, we see limits on borrowing amounts, serious constraints on administrative flexibility for loan repayment and broader regulations, and shifts in Pell Grant focus towards workforce programs. It feels like an emphasis on cost control and maybe redirecting educational support.
A clear signal of certain priorities and the mechanisms chosen to achieve them. Now let's move to tax policy, another area with extensive details in the sources.
Always a crowd pleaser, taxes. What are the big changes here, according to the sources?
Well, the bill extends limitations on certain itemized deductions that many individuals or businesses might take. Things like deductions for qualified residence interest and casualty losses.
Okay, keeping those limits in place.
Yes. And it also terminates or limits several others entirely.
Like what?
Including the miscellaneous itemized deduction, the tax exclusion for bicycle commuting reimbursements, the deduction for moving expenses with some limited military exceptions, and it adjusts how wagering losses are deducted.
Okay, taking away several existing deductions or ways to reduce taxable income. What about the Salt Deduction, the state and local tax cap? That's been a huge political football.
It has. For the 2025 tax year only, the bill temporarily increases the Salt Deduction limit.
Oh, okay. To what?
It's raised to $20,000 for single filers and $40,000 for those married filing jointly.
A significant jump from the current $10K cap.
It is, but there's a catch. This increased limit isn't universal. It gets phased down based on adjusted gross income. The phase down starts at $250,000 for married filing separately and $500,000 for all other filers.
Ah, okay. So a temporary capped increase that primarily benefits higher earners, but only up to a certain income level before it phases out again.
Precisely. Now, moving to changes impacting businesses more directly.
Yeah, what's in there for them?
The bill extends the base erosion minimum tax amount, or BEAT.
Right, the anti-abuse tax for multinationals.
Exactly. It's designed to prevent shifting profits offshore too easily. The bill also adds an exception for business meals. But crucially, perhaps for our audience,
Yes.
there's a new special depreciation allowance for what's called qualified production property.
Okay, what does that mean?
It allows for 100% depreciation in the year the property is placed in service.
Whoa, 100% upfront depreciation for production equipment. That sounds like a massive incentive for businesses investing in, say, manufacturing or production capabilities here in the U.S.
Exactly. A very clear tax lever to encourage that specific kind of investment.
Interesting. What else on the business or investment side?
Opportunity zones. Those areas that designated for incentivized investment, they're renewed and enhanced. The sources note a specific emphasis on rural opportunity zones.
Okay, focus on rural areas.
And new reporting requirements are added for the qualified opportunity funds that handle these investments, along with penalties for not complying. So increased focus and oversight there.
Got it. Anything else major on taxes?
There's a new endowment tax for certain educational institutions. It's structured with tiered rates based on what the bill defines as the student-adjusted endowment.
Taxing large university endowments.
And the sources also detail changes to foreign tax rules. Notably, increasing withholding taxes on payments made to applicable persons from countries the bill classifies as discriminatory foreign countries. The sources provide the criteria for that classification too.
Okay, so tax policy changes cover individual deductions, a temporary SALT fix, big business incentives like that 100% depreciation, updates to opportunity zones, and new taxes or rules targeting university endowments and certain foreign transactions. Seems aimed at a mix of deficit reduction, targeted investment incentives, and maybe revenue generation.
A complex set of objectives reflected in those various provisions, definitely. Let's move on now to energy, environment, and public lands. These are areas where policy often intersects directly with infrastructure and resource technology.
Right. What stands out here in the sources?
One notable item is the rescission of unobligated balances from some programs established by the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA.
Rescission, meaning pulling back funds.
Exactly, clawing back funding that hadn't been spent yet. This specifically targets money intended for state-based home energy efficiency contractor training grants, certain Department of Energy loan programs, and some initiatives related to environmental and climate data collection.
Okay, so pulling back funds previously allocated to some clean energy and climate-related programs under the IRA. What about traditional energy, like natural gas?
There are changes affecting natural gas exports and imports. The bill imposes charges for applying to export or import natural gas.
New fees.
Yes, and it includes provisions for expedited review processes for certain applications, though applicants have to identify all necessary federal authorizations up front to qualify for that faster review.
Okay. Adding fees, potentially speeding up the review process if you have your ducks in a row. What about oil and gas leasing on public lands?
The bill includes mandates for the frequency and scale of these lease sales. It requires sales happen immediately upon completion of necessary preliminary steps and in a timely manner after that.
Mandating the pace.
And mandating the scope. It requires that not less than 50% of available and eligible nominated parcels must be offered in those sales.
Half of what's nominated has to be offered. Okay. Royalty rates.
The sources detail changes there too. The minimum onshore royalty rate is set at 12.5%, with a maximum of 18.75%. Offshore rates also fall within this range depending on the location.
Okay, so mandating specific levels of access and adjusting the federal government's take from production on public lands. Are there similar things for renewable energy projects on public lands, fees or mandates?
Yes. The bill introduces new fees for getting rights of way for renewable energy projects on public lands.
What kind of fees?
Two types mentioned: an acreage rent, based on a specified calculation, and a capacity fee. The capacity fee is the greater of the acreage rent, or an amount based on the project's generating capacity, its power output.
So you pay based on land used and potential power generated?
Essentially. The acreage rent is an annual fee, but the source notes payment can be deferred until the project actually starts generating energy.
Okay, so fees for both fossil fuels and renewables on public lands, though structured differently. What about other resources like timber?
The bill mandates specific timber production levels for both the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management, the BLM.
Mandated harvest levels.
Yes. Within 1 year of enactment, the relevant secretaries must ensure harvest volumes equal or exceed amounts 25% higher than historical averages for BLM lands, and specific percentages above historical averages for Forest Service lands, varying by region.
Wow, mandating significant increases in timber harvesting. So in this whole section, it sounds like a mix. Pulling back some climate funds, streamlining or adjusting processes and fees for both fossil fuels and renewables, and mandating higher levels of resource extraction like oil, gas, and timber on public lands. It really reflects a complex tension in energy and resource policy.
A balancing act, or perhaps a specific tilting of the scales depending on your perspective. Now let's move to defense and security. This is an area with direct and significant implications for technology development and deployment.
Right. This is where it connects most directly to our usual focus on tech. What are the key appropriations and policy changes here, based on the sources?
Well, the bill appropriates substantial funds for various defense programs, and the sources highlight specific technological capabilities being funded.
Such as?
Funding for expanding and strengthening long-range, multi-service cruise missiles, developing and producing short-range anti-ship missiles for the Navy and Marine Corps, anti-ship seekers for Army ballistic missiles.
Lots of missile tech.
Yes. And increasing production capacity for next-gen Army medium-range ballistic missiles. There's also funding mentioned to mitigate issues with aging supply chains for medium-range air-launched missiles.
So clearly a focus on advanced missile capabilities and ensuring the industrial base can actually produce them.
Definitely seems to prioritize specific types of long-range and anti-ship strike capabilities, but it's broader than just missiles.
Okay.
The bill also includes funds for procuring and integrating long-endurance unmanned aerial systems, drones for surveillance,
UAS.
developing alternative positioning and navigation technology for contested environments, where GPS might be jammed or unavailable,
Critical capability.
accelerating development of military logistics and energy capabilities, and accelerating small modular nuclear reactor technology relevant to defense applications.
SMRs for defense. Interesting.
Specific aircraft are also funded, including the F-47, F-XX, and the MQ-25 tanker drone. And significant resources are allocated to strategic nuclear forces.
So a really wide range of investments: unmanned systems, alternative navigation tech, advanced logistics, nuclear tech, new aircraft, and modernizing the nuclear arsenal. What about Homeland Security?
For Homeland Security, there's funding specifically mentioned for border security assets. The sources point to $673 million allocated for the biometric entry and exit system.
Biometrics at the border.
Yes. But importantly, the bill restricts the use of these funds for certain surveillance towers that haven't been tested and formally accepted by the federal government.
So indicating some caution about deploying specific surveillance technologies before they're fully vetted.
Seems like it. There are also grants provided for state reimbursement related to border security activities and funding noted for the protection of presidential residences.
Okay. Funding for tech like biometrics, but with strings attached regarding deployment of some untested surveillance tech. Immigration policy is also part of this section.
Yes. The bill imposes new fees for filing certain immigration applications with an immigration court. Specifically mentioned are suspension of deportation and cancellation of removal.
Okay, more fees for specific immigration processes.
It also includes provisions for bonuses for personnel from ICE immigration and customs enforcement, and requirements for obtaining information about the sponsors of unaccompanied alien children.
Got it. More fees, incentives for enforcement personnel, sponsor info requirements. Now, let's bring this all back to our core audience, the tech folks listening. How does this massive, diverse bill connect directly to you?
Right. This is where some key details, particularly popping up in the defense and security sections, but also elsewhere, become highly relevant. First, while it impacts more than just defense, the bill imposes restrictions on certain clean energy tax credits. It ties eligibility to domestic content requirements.
Made in America rules for clean energy tech.
Essentially, yes. But it goes further. It defines prohibited foreign entities based on their ties to what the bill terms covered nations and foreign control.
So it's explicitly linking geopolitical concerns and national security with the incentives for developing and manufacturing technology.
Precisely. Specifically, components for clean energy in this case. It directly influences supply chains and where investment in that tech might flow. Even a clean energy tax credit becomes a tool shaped by international relations and security concerns about where technology is produced.
Wait, okay, that's a clear connection. What else?
And then there's a very, very specific limitation noted in the sources regarding artificial intelligence and machine learning regulation.
Okay. This sounds important.
It is. The bill includes a provision stating that federal requirements cannot be imposed on AI models, systems, or automated decision systems unless those requirements are either explicitly required under an existing federal law, or if they're imposed under a generally applicable law, they have to be imposed in the same manner on non-AI models and systems that perform comparable functions.
Whoa, hold on. So let me get this straight. If a law applies to all data processing systems equally, fine, it can apply to AI. But you can't create a new rule just for AI or apply a general rule differently just because it's AI, unless there's a specific act of Congress explicitly authorizing that AI-specific regulation.
That's exactly what the source indicates the bill mandates.
Wow.
It's a significant policy statement. It appears to limit the ability of federal agencies to develop AI-specific regulations using their existing general authorities. They'd need explicit direction from Congress, or the regulation would have to apply neutrally to all systems doing similar things, AI or not.
That has potentially huge implications for how future AI governance might proceed in the U.S. That detail alone is incredibly relevant to anyone working in AI. It could shape the entire future regulatory environment they operate in.
Absolutely. It really highlights the intersection of high-level legislative strategy and very specific technology policy. So you see, while much of the bill covers things like, Medicaid details or timber mandate.
Yeah, things that might seem distant.
Right. But its impact on the U.S. economy, on the talent pipeline, through those education changes, the direction of research funding via defense appropriations, and these specific regulations targeting technology like clean energy manufacturing location and AI governance. It's undeniable. Understanding this broad legislative brushstroke provides vital context for where resources, priorities, and regulatory attention are being directed in the U.S., and that, in turn, shapes the entire environment for tech innovation.
It really does tie everything together, doesn't it? Even if the parts seem disparate at first glance.
Yeah.
From obscure healthcare rules all the way to AI regulation, it's one giant legislative package influencing the national direction.
Precisely. It lays out a complex map.
Okay. So we've taken a real deep dive into this substantial bill today. We navigated its many, many sections based entirely on the sources you provided us. We've seen provisions impacting healthcare access and administration, pretty big changes to student loans and educational funding,
Major shifts in tax policy touching individuals and businesses.
adjustments to how public lands and resources are managed, significant appropriations for defense technologies.
And those really specific directives related to clean energy manufacturing location and, crucially, the regulation of AI.
It's a truly sweeping piece of legislation, touching so many different facets of American life and the economy.
It certainly lays out a complex set of strategic priorities reflected in those details.
Absolutely. Which brings us to a final thought. Given the diverse and clearly impactful nature of the policies contained just within this one bill, covering everything from specific social programs to high-level defense tech and AI rules, and considering the significant high-profile opposition it garnered, like from figures such as Elon Musk mentioned in the sources, what does this comprehensive legislative package truly signal about the strategic priorities and maybe the challenges the United States is choosing to address in the coming years?
A big question.
And perhaps even more importantly for you listening, how might these chosen priorities, both the ones stated explicitly and the ones maybe just implied, shape the future trajectory of technology development, funding, and deployment right here in the U.S.? Something to definitely consider as you look at the next research paper or plan your next project.